30 years ago, when I was a young photographer starting out with the Irish Press newspaper group in Dublin, a friend suggested looking at an event that was taking place that summer in the village of Connemara in County Galway. The event was Connemara, the great gathering of the traditional working sailboats of the west of Ireland. These boats are known as Connemara or Galway Hookers, and for centuries they sailed the waters of Galway Bay, transporting people, goods and animals, and connecting coastal communities and the islands with Galway city and market towns like Connemara. Connemara had a long history of trade with the people of Connemara across the bay. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, a fleet of Galway hookers carried cargoes of corn, barley, lime and timber for merchants in the town. And in return, the boats brought in fuel for the households of County Clare in the form of turf cut from the many peat bogs of Connemara. Transport and fishing once provided work for hundreds of these boats, and this continued up until the Second World War, when road improvements caused the sea trade to dwindle. By the 1960s, only a handful of hookers remained, these mainly carrying turf to the Aran Islands. With their working days over, many boats were abandoned, and a unique rural maritime way of life was about to be lost forever. The first gathering of the boats had been held in Connemara in 1978. It was an attempt to save the last few remaining Galway hookers, and to preserve for future generations the skills needed to build and to sail them. Fortunately, some of the men who had worked the boats survived. These Bádóirí, as they are called in Irish, retained their unique experience of handling these mighty craft, as well as an intimate knowledge of local waters. There is something about these old boats with their giant brown calico sails that captivates all who experience them. I too was captivated, and over the next few years returned many times to the west of Ireland to photograph these most iconic of traditional Irish workboats and the men who sail them. Along with my stills gear, I took with me my father's old 16mm Bolex film camera. The result is a collection of images and film footage that documents what remained of the Galway hookers and of the people and places associated with them. This is Galway Pass in Connemara. No working hookers come here now. Still standing, though, are the old stone pile markers that guided them through these narrow channels from the many small harbours nearby. Once boats laden with turf made the daily journey through here out into Greatman's Bay to the Aran Islands. Treeless and rocky, the Aran Islands have no turf of their own, and before the advent of bottled gas and electricity, the islanders relied on the hookers to bring fuel from the mainland for cooking and heating. Little had been written about this trade until Richard J. Scott first put together its story. Dick Scott was a keen sailor and a regular visitor to the west, and I met him in Connemara. He suggested I head out to Shrahán Pier in Connemara, where some of the last remaining turf boats were gathering to compete in a race across the bay. It was at Shrahán that I first came across the Coppel and its skipper Johnny Bailey of Letchermore. The Coppel is a boatman or big boat, the largest of the hooker classes. 36 feet long, it was built in the 1860s and has been owned since then by successive generations of the Bailey family. The coastline of the west of Ireland is dotted with small stone piers. Some were used by the hookers to land fish, others for collecting seaweed for fertiliser. Most of the piers, however, were used for loading turf, cut from local peat bogs. Thousands of acres of blanket bog cover South Connemara, and over the centuries, hundreds of thousands of tons of turf have been dug from these bogs to fuel cottage fires. The turf was cut by hand using a long spade known as a slaw, and the sods were stacked and left to dry in the summer sun. Later, the dried turf would be moved by barrow, cart or hazelwood creel to the nearest loading pier. At Shrahán Pier that day, the couple joined with other old turf traders to compete in a race across the bay to Kinvara, carrying their traditional cargoes and recreating a scene common in the west of Ireland for over 200 years. Many hands made light work of loading as family and friends turned out to help. When these were working boats, however, and crewed by just 2 or 3 men, getting 10 to 15 tons on board was back-breaking work. At the height of the turf trade, as many as 15 hookers a day might sail from here to Inishmore, the largest of the Aran Islands, 10 miles away. A boat that often made that journey is the Tony. Owned by the O'Brien family, it was built in the 1880s and is 38 feet long. It was skippered at Shrahán by Máirtín O'Brien, whose father Mike was the last hooker man running turf to the Aran Islands when the trade finished in 1965. Most hookers, like the couple and the Tony, were family-owned, while others were owned by shopkeepers who used them to deliver general supplies up and down the coast. The hookers really were the articulated trucks of their day. And competition was keen among the boatmen, as the first loads ashore commanded the best prices. Usually, the islanders would pay cash for a turf load, but sometimes they would barter a calf or a bullock with the boatmen. Either way, the boats rarely returned empty, but would carry limestone, cattle, fish, or potatoes back to the mainland. No one is sure where the design of these boats originates. Some suggest a connection with the hook and long-line fishing hikers of Holland. Others believe they may have evolved from English smuggling luggers in the 17th century. What is certain is that the features that make these boats so suited to Atlantic waters are unique to Galway Bay for at least 2 centuries. These features are the tumble home or rounded belly of the boat, that enables large cargoes to be carried, and the accentuated sheer that allows the boat to move quickly and handle easily through the water. A Galway hooker is constructed of closely spaced sawn oak frames attached to a thick beech keel. And eased around these frames, 1.5-inch large planks are spiked to give the boat its distinctive shape. Plans were often non-existent, and boats were built by eye, using tables and ratios. Out west, the main boat-building centre was on Moynish Island. Moynish was home to several boat-building families: the Caseys, the Clahertys and the Mulcairns. This is Colm Mulcairns. The last 2 members of the Claherty boat-building family were brothers Marcus and Joseph Claherty. When I met them, they were coming to the end of their working days. They were camera shy at first, but eventually allowed me to photograph them in their work shed, their grandfather's hand tools on the walls behind them, with a model of a boat they had just finished. Not far from Weenish is MacDara's Island. MacDara was a monk who lived in the 6th century and was adopted by local fishermen as their patron saint. A tiny oratory on the island is a place of pilgrimage on his feast day each July, when a fleet of local boats carries hundreds to the island for confession and open-air mass. MacDara's Island was a place of reverence for the hooker men, and in the past, working hookers would dip their sails 3 times when passing. Along with religious patterns, regattas were often held, and St. MacDara's Island was one of the oldest and last remaining venues for great sailing races. And not just for hookers, but also for curraghs, these canvas-covered rowboats, such a feature of life along the west coast. Larger versions of these racing curraghs often worked hand in hand with the hookers, carrying cargoes ashore where shallow waters prevented the bigger boats landing. The renewed interest in the hookers in the 1980s led to the restoration of old craft and the building of new boats. This is the Morning Star, an old Connemara boat. It was found and rebuilt by Dubliner Johnny Helian. And this is the St. Patrick, a boat restored by Paddy Barry of Dublin and sailed by him and his crew to New York and to Greenland. One new boat was commissioned by Noel O'Tourish of Inver. It was a boat I had seen under construction in the Claddagh brothers' yard, and was the last boat they would build together. In honour of the 2 bachelor boat builders of Weenish Island, Noel named the boat the Marqueen Joe. It was through Noel that I met another 2 of the most experienced and respected Bádóirí in the West. The first lived here at the Claddagh in Galway City. The Claddagh is one of the oldest fishing villages in Ireland, and it was in the 19th century a distinct Gaelic community, and home to hundreds of fishermen who sailed hookers from here to catch herring in Galway Bay. Herring sold by local women at the nearby Spanish Arch. Noel O'Tourish invited me here to record his new boat being fitted with her sails by local fisherman Pat Jennings. Pat Jennings started lobster fishing as a child, and by the time he was 14 had left school to work on his father's boat. For years he and his brother Sean sailed flour, tea, sugar and general household goods to North Connemara. Rigging and sailmaking were usually done here by the fishermen themselves. The cloth used for sailmaking was a heavy calico. This was proofed with a mixture of cashew bark and butter, giving the sails their distinctive brown colour. The Marqueen Joe is what's known as a liawad, or half-boat. A liawad measured around 32 feet in length and could carry loads up to 10 tons. This is Pádraigín Brídhrua McDonagh of Carrow. Another famous boarder, he helmed the Marqueen Joe during her first season on the water. The term Galway Hooker really describes a family of 4 boats. As well as the Bádóirí and the Leabhad, there are two smaller classes. The Glúteog is similar in design to the bigger boats, but measures just 24 to 28 feet in length. She was used for fishing and for transporting small cargoes, and her shallow draft allows her to be manoeuvred ashore at low tide. Many of these are sailing craft now, and their old brown calico replaced with white terraline sails. The Pucón is smaller again. It is an open boat and has a unique rig. This is reminiscent of the dhows of Egypt and hints at links between the west of Ireland and maritime cultures of the Mediterranean. All the boats carry huge sails, and so heavy ballast is needed to keep them upright. Ballast was created simply by placing large rocks and stones into the hold. In light winds, these stones could be thrown overboard and easily replaced at the next landing. Each visit west brought an invite to sail on another boat. This is the Lord, owned by the Millet family of Carna. The boat I really wanted to take pictures on, however, was the Capel. And a few years later, at Shrochan Pier for another turf race, Johnny Bailey offered to take me with him and his family to Connemara. On board the Capel with Johnny Bailey were his brothers Pádraig and Dudley, and his sons Danny, Seamus and Darren. On the Hooker's foredeck, a hatch allowed the crew to drop down into a little cuddy or cabin. Here they could cook or sleep. Cooking was done on a small turf fire set on a stone hearth in the timbers at the bottom of the boat. When Pádraig Bailey brewed up in the early afternoon, smoke from the fire wafted through the turf load. This is one of my favourite images. It's a shot of Pádraig and Johnny Bailey at the helm of their family boat, just where their father and grandfather stood before them. On family boats, life at sea started at an early age. Johnny Bailey was just 7 when he first sailed with his father, Peterine Ballia, and at 17 became master of the Capel himself when his father became ill. For years he sailed turf and porter and even kegs of poitín to the outlying islands. It took 9 hours to cross Galway Bay, and later that afternoon we sailed into Connemara. In the few years since the revival began, a musical community had developed in and around Connemara. On the streets and in the town's many pubs, sessions provided a backdrop to talk of boats and crews and of the racing that would take place over the weekend. Cartier-Bresson once wrote that photographers deal in things that are continually vanishing, and when they have gone, there is no contrivance on earth that will bring them back again. We cannot develop and print a memory. It's over 30 years now since that first gathering in Kinvara when I began to photograph the last of the hooker men of Connemara. And since then, all the working Bádóirí have passed away. But the revival came just in time to save many of their historic boats. A store of experience and knowledge of backwaters and channels has been saved, along with Irish versions of sailing terms no longer in daily use. Today, the boats have passed to a new generation as pleasure craft. The Connemara continues to be the largest annual gathering of boats, and the name Kinvara has become synonymous with the great spirit of traditional sail. 40 years ago, the pier here was overgrown with grass and weeds. Now, thousands of visitors gather each summer to enjoy a boat that has become a cultural symbol for the country. Visiting Connemara, Michael D. Higgins, now President of Ireland, acknowledged the enduring place of the hooker tradition in the lives of the people of the West. The references, he said, are there in the Sean songs, in the language, in dancing and in music. The couple remains in the Bailey family. The last time I visited Kinvara, it was Johnny Bailey's son, Dara, who helmed the boat. A schoolboy when I first met him, Dara proudly maintains the family tradition that began in the 1860s. Johnny Bailey died in 2004. He was the last Máiste Bád Mór, the last skipper of a Galway hooker to have worked the turf trade.